At Thanksgiving dinner, my sister stood up in front of the whole family, announced they had voted me out and I was no longer one of them. So I placed a thick folder on the table, and the second she opened it, she started screaming. She called it a vote, like I was a contestant on a reality show, like there was a tribal council and torch snuffing and a confessional booth somewhere down the hall. Serena stood up from her chair at the head of the table, my mother's chair, which she'd claimed sometime in the last few years without anyone saying a word about it, and she smoothed her dress. It was a deep burgundy wrap dress, the kind that photographs well, the kind she wore to events she knew people would be talking about afterward, the kind you wear when you've practiced what you're going to say. She looked around the table with that pageant queen smile, slow, deliberate, letting the moment build like she was waiting for her cue. "We've decided," she said, "that you're not family anymore." Then they cheered. My cousin Rachel clapped, not politely, enthusiastically, the way you clap at a concert when the opening act finally finishes and the real show is starting. Uncle Rob raised his wine glass. My own mother laughed, not a nervous laugh, not an uncomfortable one, a real laugh, the kind that crinkles the corners of your eyes and reaches your chest. She said, "Well, someone had to say it." My father sipped his beer, set it down, nodded at the can, like he was agreeing with himself about something private, probably for the best. I sat there staring at the cold stuffing on my plate. Nobody spoke up for me. Not one person at that table, not the cousins I'd driven to doctor's appointments when they didn't have cars, not the aunt I'd helped pack up and move across town on a Saturday in July when it was 94 degrees, not my own parents, who I had kept financially afloat through 3 separate crises in the last 5 years alone. The table had 17 people at it, 17 people who had eaten food I'd contributed money toward, who had accepted transfers I'd sent without being asked, who had taken my calls in emergencies and received my help like it was simply the natural order of things, and who were now raising their glasses. I pushed my chair back slowly. The scrape of it across the hardwood floor cut through the noise. Everyone went a little quieter. I looked at Serena. "You guys actually rehearsed this?" I said. Her smile got wider. "You've been toxic for years. We're finally done pretending." My mother reached for the cranberry sauce like I hadn't spoken. She passed it to Uncle Rob with a smile, like we were discussing the weather, like she hadn't just watched her older daughter get publicly expelled from the family over turkey and stuffing. "It's unanimous," she added, almost cheerfully. I looked around the table one more time. Every face. I gave them all a chance. Nobody flinched. Nobody looked away. They looked at me the way people look at something they've already decided is finished. "Good," I said quietly. Then I reached into my bag. "I need to tell you who these people are. I need to give you the full picture, because the scene I just described doesn't make sense without the years that preceded it. My name is Claire. I'm 34 years old. I grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in a 3-bedroom house on Garrison Avenue that always smelled slightly of mildew and my mother's lavender candles, a combination that to this day makes my chest tighten when I encounter it. My parents, Dennis and Lorraine, were not bad people in the way that bad people are obvious about it. They were the slow burn kind, the kind who love you just enough that you spend 20 years wondering if the problem is actually you, the kind whose favoritism is never stated outright. It lives in the silences, in who gets asked about their day, in who gets the new backpack when money is tight, and who gets last year's. Serena is my younger sister. She's 30 years old, beautiful, charming, effortlessly persuasive in the way that some people simply are, the way the atmosphere in a room shifts when they walk in, and everyone wants to be the one they're looking at. Growing up, Serena was the family's sun. Everything orbited her. Her school plays, her cheerleading championships, her heartbreaks, and her victories. The time she got the lead in the spring musical, and my parents drove 2 hours to see her perform on a Tuesday night. When Serena cried, the household responded. When I had a hard week, my mother would say, "Well, at least you're not dramatic about everything like your sister." I took that as a compliment for a long time. I think I took it as a compliment because the alternative, that I had simply learned to suffer quietly and call it strength, was harder to sit with. I moved out at 19, not because of a fight, not because of some dramatic confrontation. I just understood by then that I was expected to be the quiet one, the functional one, the one who handled things. So I went and handled things. I enrolled at the University of Tulsa on a partial academic scholarship, worked 2 jobs to cover the gap, nights at a hotel front desk, weekends at a catering company where I learned that rich people tip badly and smile a lot, graduated in 4 years with a degree in accounting, and got a job at a regional firm in Dallas where I'd eventually become a senior auditor. I kept records. This is relevant. It's actually the most relevant thing about me. I am, by training and by nature, a person who documents things. Not obsessively, not in a paranoid way. I just write things down. Dates and amounts, and what was said and what was actually meant. It's what makes me good at my job. It's what made what happened possible. I moved to Dallas in the fall of 2015. Serena, at that same point, was on her second major reinvention. She'd started in nursing, hated it, switched to communications, decided that wasn't the right fit either, then announced she was going to Europe for 6 months to find herself. My parents funded this. They were not in a position to fund it. My father had been laid off that spring from his warehouse supervisor job, and my mother's part-time work at a dental office covered roughly half their mortgage, but they funded it anyway. I didn't say anything. It wasn't my money, and I understood by then that questioning how resources were allocated in our family was not something that went well for me. She came back from Europe with a leather jacket, a portfolio of badly lit photography, and Kyle Ashworth. worth. 33 years old, handsome in that soft, expensive way. The kind of handsome that looks better in photos than in person. That photographs at a 9, but in real life settles into a 7. He worked in corporate marketing for a pharmaceutical company in Tulsa. He drove a lease he couldn't really afford and wore blazers to family dinners and talked about his career goals with the comfortable confidence of someone who had never had a plan fail. He adored Serena, publicly, completely, in a way that she loved being adored and that I, at the time, found genuinely sweet. They got engaged 14 months after she returned from Europe. The wedding was in September 2020, right as the world was slowly, cautiously reopening. Small venue by pre-pandemic standards, 70 guests, outdoor ceremony at a vineyard 40 minutes outside Tulsa. Serena had sent me the budget breakdown in July of that year. It came to $42,000. My parents had $18,000 saved after liquidating a small retirement account, plus access to a credit card with a $9,000 limit that was already carrying a balance. That left a $15,000 gap. Serena didn't ask me to fill it. That's the thing I want you to understand. She never asked directly. She called me on a Tuesday night in early August and cried. She described the vineyard and the string lights and the linen tablecloths and the specific shade of ivory she'd always imagined for the floral arrangements, and she said she didn't know how they were going to make it work and that maybe they'd just have to do something simple. She said simple the way people say it when they're hoping you'll tell them they don't have to settle. I sent $14,500 via wire transfer 2 days later. I kept the confirmation. I always keep the confirmations. The wedding was beautiful. I won't take that away from it. It genuinely was. I wore the bridesmaid dress Serena had chosen, a dusty mauve that didn't suit anyone in the party but looked perfect in photographs, which I think was the point. I toasted them at the reception and I meant it. I liked Kyle then. He seemed solid. He seemed like the kind of person who would stabilize Serena rather than enable her, and I wanted that for her. Whatever complicated feelings I carried about the money, I set them aside at that table and wished them well from a real place. But there was a moment earlier that day that I've never told anyone about. I arrived at the vineyard in the morning to help with setup. I went looking for Serena to ask about the centerpiece placement and found her in the bridal suite, a converted barn with exposed wood beams and string lights and a vanity mirror ringed with bulbs, the kind of room that exists to be photographed. She was standing at the window with her back to me, phone pressed to her ear. She didn't hear me open the door. I heard her say, I know, but Claire always comes through. She literally has no life and nothing to spend money on. What else is she going to do with it? A pause while the other person spoke. Then, exactly, just let her feel useful. I closed the door quietly. I stood outside on the gravel for a moment. Then I went back to help with the centerpieces. I made myself forget I'd heard it. I want to be precise about that. I didn't forget. I filed it. Somewhere behind the part of myself that still wanted a sister, there was the part that kept records, and that part wrote it down. For 3 years after the wedding, things were fine. Fine in the surface way. The kind of fine that requires maintenance and careful not looking. I visited Tulsa twice a year, usually for Thanksgiving and for a long weekend in summer. I called on birthdays. I sent money when they asked, and sometimes when they didn't. March 2021, $8,000 to cover Kyle's enrollment in a 30-day residential rehabilitation program for alcohol dependency. He'd been drinking heavily since the pandemic began, Serena told me. It had gotten bad. I didn't tell anyone outside the family. I wasn't asked to keep it quiet, but it felt like the right thing to do. I sent the money and asked no questions. October 2021, $2,300 for what Serena described in a text sent at 11:42 p.m. as an emergency dental situation. She'd sent a photo of what looked like a chipped tooth. I transferred the money within the hour. It was only 6 weeks later when she posted an Instagram photo with the caption, New Year, New Smile, complete with a before and after that showed her getting porcelain veneers, that I understood what kind of emergency it had been. I said nothing. Spring and summer 2022, $12,000 for my mother's credit card debt, spread across 3 separate transfers over 5 months because she kept discovering additional cards I hadn't known about. The first card was a Visa I'd known about since I was in college. The second was a store card with a jewelry retailer. The third was a card in my father's name that my mother was the primary user of, carrying $8,000 at 24% interest. I paid them all. Fall 2022, $4,500 for what my mother called a family emergency, in a voicemail that gave no details but conveyed significant urgency. I called back immediately and sent the money that afternoon. I found out 3 weeks later, when Serena posted a sunset photo with a location tag, that the family emergency had been a long weekend in Cabo San Lucas with my parents and Kyle. I want to be honest with you here, because the easy version of this story makes me look like a victim and nothing else, and that's not accurate. I wasn't naive. I could see the pattern. I saw it clearly. The way you can see something clearly and still make yourself believe you're misreading it, because the alternative is a kind of grief you're not ready for. I kept telling myself that family is complicated, that times had been hard for everyone, that generosity is its own reward. I kept telling myself that next year things would stabilize. I believed that right up until the moment I stopped. September 27th, 2023, Serena called. She and Kyle wanted to open a business, a boutique event planning company. She'd always been creative, she said. Kyle had the marketing background. They had a business plan. She'd email it. They needed $80,000 in small business financing. They'd found a lender willing to work with them, but the lender required a co-signer, someone with clean credit, documented income, income, a strong, verifiable financial profile. I didn't finish reading the business plan. No, I said, just that. One word, quietly. Serena went silent for a moment. You're serious. I'm serious, I said. I love you, but I'm not co-signing an $80,000 loan. You have the money. That's not the point. If the business struggles, that debt follows me. It affects my credit, my financial profile, my ability to take on a mortgage or make my own investments. I'm not in a position to take that risk. You helped with everything else. I helped with a lot of things, I said. This is different. There was a pause. Then she hung up. I wrote the date down. September 27th. I noted the time, 7:14 p.m. I noted that the call lasted 4 minutes and 31 seconds. I didn't know why I was doing it with such precision. I think some part of me already knew. October arrived and the temperature dropped. Not in Tulsa, in our relationship. My texts to Serena went unread, then unreplied. Not immediately. She let a few days pass first, to make it look organic. But by the second week of October, the silence was complete. Kyle stopped responding to my messages about a fantasy football league we'd been in together for 2 years. My mother began calling less frequently, and when she did call, her voice carried a particular strain, the tone of someone performing a duty they've been assigned, rather than someone who wants to be on the phone with you. Then the social media campaign started. It began with Serena posting quotes, the kind that are technically about personal growth but function as public accusations. Your peace matters more than their opinion. Cutting toxic people out is self-care, not selfishness. Not everyone deserves access to the new version of you. I noticed them. I told myself I was reading into it. Then Rachel, my 26-year-old cousin, who I had driven 4 hours round trip to help move out of a bad apartment situation 2 years earlier, who had cried in my car and told me I was the only person in the family she trusted, started reposting similar content. Then my Aunt Linda liked to post on Serena's page. Then Uncle Rob, who I had helped write a resume when he was job hunting in 2020, made a comment that a mutual friend screenshotted and sent me. Claire's always been selfish. Some people are just wired that way. I stopped posting on social media in October. I went quiet. But here's the thing about being an auditor. You don't stop looking at evidence when you stop talking. The investigation just gets quieter. I had 5 years of bank statements, 5 years of Venmo receipts and wire transfer confirmations and text message threads where money had been requested, discussed, and sent. I had a folder on my laptop that I'd been lazily, carelessly maintaining for years, labeled with zero creativity, documents. I printed everything and organized it chronologically. I built a summary sheet for the front page, total transferred over 5 years, itemized by date and amount and stated purpose. The number at the bottom was $78,300. Then I found the thread. Serena had created a family group chat in early 2022. I'd been added to it along with everyone else. But at some point during a group reorganization that spring, she had accidentally added me to a second, separate thread, a smaller one between her and Kyle and Rachel and my mother. I don't think she ever realized her mistake. The thread sat in my app for months, and I'd never clicked into it because I'd assumed it was a duplicate notification. I opened it on a Sunday afternoon in early November, looking for something unrelated. I read the whole thing. 2 years of messages. Blue bubbles. She's a cash cow with no spine. That was Serena. Dated October 4th, 3 days after I'd sent the $4,500 emergency for the Cabo trip. Honestly, she should be grateful we even include her, my mother, from June of the prior year. She's bitter because she's single and has no kids. The money is probably the only way she feels connected to us. Rachel in July. Rachel, who had cried in my car, who I had trusted. Just let her think it's normal. She won't say anything. She never does. Serena again, from February. I sat with that for a long time. I didn't cry. I want to be precise about that. I think I'd done most of the crying in October, in the privacy of my apartment in Dallas, when I'd been honest enough with myself to name what was happening. By November, sitting with those messages, something quieter had settled in. Something that didn't need to cry. Something that just read carefully and understood. I printed the screenshots, added them to the folder, added a cover page with a note about the source. Then I called Patricia Okafor. Patricia is an attorney in Dallas I'd worked with years earlier on an estate matter after a close friend passed. She's precise, warm, completely unflappable. I told her what I needed. She had it ready within a week. A second document, sealed and notarized. Power of attorney, revoked. Medical proxy designation, revoked. Emergency contact status, removed from all accounts and updated with the hospital and her office. All signed. All finalized. All legally binding from the moment it left her office. I drove to Tulsa on Thanksgiving morning. I left Dallas at 6 a.m. The drive was 3.5 hours, and I spent most of it not listening to anything, just the road. I brought a bottle of Malbec that I'd planned to contribute to the table. I never opened it. I brought the folder in my bag and the sealed envelope in the inside pocket of my coat. I sat down at that table and let them eat their dinner. 2.5 hours. I watched my mother laugh at Serena's jokes. I watched Kyle refill glasses and compliment the food and charm the room effortlessly, the way he always could. I watched Rachel glance at me once or twice with something careful in her expression that I couldn't fully read. I ate my turkey. I asked my uncle about his work. I was pleasant. I was quiet. I was waiting. When Serena stood up, I was almost relieved. The waiting had been the hardest part. I pulled the folder from my bag and placed it flat in the center of the table. Not dramatically, carefully. The thud it made when it landed cut through the noise of the room. Solid. Final. The sound of something that weighs something. something. Serena blinked. The smile held for a moment. Momentum. But something moved behind her eyes. What is that? Why don't you find out? I said. Quick pause from the story. If you enjoy these stories, consider taking a listen to our Spotify show, linked in the description, for early access to new stories in better audio quality. Now back to the video. She reached for it the way she reached for everything. Like she already owned it. Like the outcome had already been decided, and this was merely the ceremony. She ripped it open. The smirk still sat on her face as she turned to the first page. I watched the exact moment it left. The first page was the summary sheet. $78,300. Itemized. Dates. Stated purposes in the left column. Actual purposes. Verified by bank statements, social media posts, and the group thread in the right. The gap between the two columns told its own story without any commentary from me. She turned the next page, and the next, and the next. The table went quiet in stages. Not all at once. In sections, like a candle going out room by room through a house. Kyle reached over and took the folder from Serena's hands. She didn't resist. She was still reading the same page, like she'd forgotten where she was. Kyle moved quickly at first, flipping pages, and then abruptly stopped. I watched his jaw set. He turned the page back, then forward. His eyes moved the same line twice. What's this hotel charge? His voice had gone very flat. Not a question, an accounting. Santa Monica, 3 nights, April 15th through the 18th. Who's Alyssa? The name hit the table like something dropped from a significant height. Serena's head snapped toward him. Don't start. I want to explain the hotel charge, because I want to be accurate about what I knew and when I knew it. In April of that year, Serena had texted me asking for $800. Her card had been declined, she said, and she needed a hotel covered immediately. She was traveling for work and couldn't reach Kyle, and her backup card wasn't working. I transferred the money within 20 minutes without asking questions. The charge had appeared in my records because I'd sent the money. The name Alyssa appeared in the booking confirmation that had forwarded to her email, and then somehow, in a chain of forwarded receipts, ended up in a thread she'd shared with me about the trip expenses. I had filed it. I had not, at the time, understood fully what I was filing. Sitting at that table, watching Kyle's face, I understood. Serena said nothing. Her silence was its own answer, the loudest one available. My mother found her voice first, hands raised, placating, her reasonable woman voice engaged. Let's all just calm down. It's Thanksgiving. We can all discuss this after. I turned to her. Sure, I said. Let's talk about the time you called me a parasite while cashing my check. The color left her face in a visible wave. We were under so much stress that year. I know you were, I said. I know exactly how much stress, because I was the one eliminating it. I bailed this family out every single time someone called, for 5 years. The first time I said no, I became the enemy. I let that land. I have it in writing, time-stamped, in your words. My father set his beer can down, slowly. He looked at the center of the table, not at me, not at Serena, just at the tablecloth in front of him. You're making this into something bigger than it is. Am I? I said. Tell me which part is bigger than it is. He didn't answer. You watch this happen, I said. Not loudly. I wasn't angry in the way that needed volume. I was past that. Every time they needed something, someone called me. Every time I needed something, I handled it myself. You saw the pattern and you let it continue because it was easier than saying anything. I paused. I'm not angry at you. I just need you to hear it said out loud, in front of everyone. He didn't deny it. That silence, somehow, was the most clarifying thing anyone said that afternoon. Serena slammed her palm on the table. The wine glasses trembled. Someone's water sloshed. You think showing up with a folder makes you the victim? You think this is some kind of trial? No, I said. I'm not the victim. I'm done. I reached into my coat. The second envelope made a softer sound when it landed on the table. Kyle caught it with one hand before it slid. He opened it, read the first line, then the second. His expression didn't change, but his breathing did. He set it down without a word. You're cutting us off completely? My mother whispered. She looked smaller somehow. Her voice had gone thin. Completely, I said. Starting right now. No emergency contact, no medical proxy, no power of attorney. Patricia Okafor's office has the paperwork on file if anyone needs to verify. Kyle set the envelope carefully at the center of the table, exactly where the folder was. He looked at Serena then, not with anger, with something colder. The kind of look that means someone has decided something privately and is only now making it visible. We need to talk tonight, he said. Quiet. About the hotel, about the money, about Alyssa. Serena's composure cracked along a fault line she'd been holding together all afternoon. Kyle, please. Tonight, he said. Just the word. Flat, absolute, immovable. Rachel had gone completely still across the table. Uncle Rob's wine glass was frozen halfway between the table and his mouth. The cousins who had clapped enthusiastically 9 minutes ago were now examining their plates with sudden deep interest. The room that had cheered was now so quiet I could hear the heat vent above the kitchen doorway. I stood up. I picked up my bag from the floor. I put on my coat. I looked around the table one final time. Not at Serena, not at my parents. Just at all 17 faces, some ashamed, some blank, some still calculating. I gave the room a long moment. Nobody said anything. I hope you all have a good holiday, I said, and I walked out. The drive to my hotel in downtown Tulsa took 11 minutes. I know because I sat in the parking garage for a while before I could make myself go up to the room, and when I checked my phone, it was 4:47 p.m. The first text came at 4:52. My mother, we need to talk. Please call me. Rachel at 5:08. Claire, I'm so sorry. sorry. I had no idea you could see that thread. Please, can we talk? Then a number I didn't recognize at 5:31, which turned out to be Kyle's work cell. I'm sorry for what happened today. I have some questions, not about the money. Just, can I call you tomorrow? I didn't respond to any of them that night. I ordered room service. I watched a movie I cannot now remember the name of. I slept deeply and without interruption, which had not been happening for the previous 2 months. The fallout was both more complicated and more predictable than I expected. Kyle moved out of the house on December 3rd, 9 days after Thanksgiving. He had apparently done some accounting of his own over those 9 days. He filed for separation before Christmas. The name Alyssa appeared in the filing, along with documentation of financial decisions he hadn't known about, money that had come in from me and gone out to purposes he'd never been told about. He texted me once more in December, not to assign blame, but to say that he'd suspected things for a while and hadn't wanted to see it clearly. He thanked me, which I found strange, and then, over time, understood. Patricia confirmed that the legal documents were bulletproof. She also, at my request, drafted a formal letter to my parents, not threatening, not punitive, simply clear. A document stating in plain language that any future requests for financial assistance would not be considered, that all legal designations had been revoked, and that any attempts to contact me through intermediaries would be treated as harassment. I didn't send it immediately. I held on to it. My mother called 7 times in December. I let every call go to voicemail. She left 4 messages over 3 weeks. The first was tearful, apologetic, soft in the corners. The second was sharper. She'd had time to feel wronged, and it showed. The third was quiet, dangerously quiet, in a way that caught in my chest, because I knew that register from childhood. That was the voice she used when she was truly, privately hurt, not performing it. The fourth was a single sentence. I know I didn't protect you. I'm sorry. That's all. I sat with that message for 3 days. I called her back on a Sunday morning in early January. We talked for 45 minutes. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't the movie version of a conversation where everything gets understood and forgiven and stitched back together. It was a real conversation, direct in a way we had never been with each other, maybe ever. She told me things I hadn't known, that Serena had been maneuvering the family group thread, that some of the messages had felt wrong to my mother even as she'd participated in them, that she had laughed at that Thanksgiving table partly out of nervousness and partly because she had felt, by that point, that she no longer knew how to resist the current Serena created. She wasn't excusing it. She was explaining it, and I believed the distinction. I told her I wasn't ready to see her yet, that I needed time to figure out what this family could actually be before I walked into a room with any of them. She said she understood, and I believed that too. I don't know if understanding is enough. I'm still working out what I need it to be. Serena called once, from a blocked number, sometime in mid-January. She didn't say anything when I answered. A long pause, 4-5 seconds, and then she hung up. I don't know what she was going to say. I've thought about it. I've imagined a version where she apologized, and a version where she was calling to escalate, and a version where she just needed to hear my voice and confirm I still existed. I don't know which one was true. I may never know. Rachel wrote me an email, an actual email, long and clearly worked over, the kind that takes multiple drafts and multiple aborted openings. She said she hadn't understood the full scope of what was happening, that she'd been following Serena's current because she'd always followed it, because Serena's gravity was that strong, and Rachel had never learned to navigate independently of it. She was sorry. She called herself a coward, which I thought was accurate and also probably cost her something to write. She asked if there was a path back eventually. I told her eventually was possible, that I would let her know. That was honest. I think that one might actually be true. Here's what I know now, from the other side of it. The $78,300 is gone. I have accepted that in the way you accept a permanent structural change, not with peace exactly, but without the sharp edge anymore. Patricia told me I could make a reasonable legal case for a portion of it. Unjust enrichment, documented misrepresentation of stated purpose. She wasn't saying I would win, but she was saying the argument wasn't frivolous. I thought about it for 2 weeks and then told her I wasn't pursuing it. The money is gone. The energy required to claw at it would cost more than whatever came back. I work remotely now from a city that isn't Tulsa. I won't say which one because it doesn't matter. What matters is that it's mine in a way that Tulsa never quite was. I have a good apartment with a real kitchen that I use. I have friends I've had for years, people who knew me before I had any money to give anyone, who don't measure my worth by my availability or my bank transfers. I got a dog in January, a 3-year-old mutt named Hendrix from the shelter, brown and white and relentlessly unbothered by everything, including my emotional state, which I find oddly stabilizing. I keep records. That will never change. Here is what I've come to understand about what happened. It was never about me being toxic. It was never really about any of the words Serena used at that table. What it was about was control, specifically the loss of it. For 5 years I had been useful, financially, practically, logistically useful, in ways that required me to stay in a particular role, the dependable one, the one with no life of her own, the one who came through. When I declined, one time, cleanly, without drama, I had broken the contract they'd never explicitly offered me but had been collecting on for years. And the response to someone who breaks that contract is to destroy their standing before they can exit on their own terms. They called it a vote. They tried to eliminate me before I could choose to leave. What they didn't know, what I know now, is that I'd already been leaving for a long time, quietly, the way I do things. I'd been calculating the exit it since at least October, maybe earlier, maybe since that moment in the bridal suite when I heard my sister explain that I had no life and should be grateful to feel useful. I had just needed to let them make the first move. I needed them to be the ones who said it out loud in front of everyone. I needed the folder. Would I grieve? And I want to be clear that there is grief here. Real grief, not performance, is not the family I had. It's the family I thought was possible. The version of Serena who might have become a sister rather than an extraction. The version of my parents who might have protected me the way I protected them. I was paying all those years for a relationship that was never fully real. The payment was the hope. The hope that if I just helped enough, showed up enough, stayed quiet enough, they would eventually see me. They saw me clearly, actually. Just not in the way I needed. I miss Thanksgiving dinners the way you miss the idea of a thing that was never quite what you imagined it was. I miss the smell of the table, the noise, the accidental warmth that even dysfunctional families generate when they're all in the same room. I miss the potential of it, but I don't miss the specific dinner, and I don't miss the specific table, and I don't miss the version of myself who sat at it quietly for years and told herself it was fine. She was doing her best. She deserved better. When I left that room in Tulsa, I wasn't triumphant. I was quiet, relieved, and grieving at the same time, which turns out to be exactly the right way to feel when you finally say what you've been too generous to say for years. They called it a vote. They thought they were eliminating me. What I know now, sitting across from Hendrix in an apartment in a city that's mine, is that I had already been walking out the door. I had the folder ready. I had the envelope signed. I just needed them to stand up first.